You know the mounds that McKenzie builds around his greens, where they're maintained at fairway height, but they bring so much character, I think, to the surrounds of a green in particular, and they can be used in a way as a hazard from the standpoint of, I mean, from a better player, a bunker's a bunker. They get in, they hit it, but you know when you're stymied or stuck behind a mound, and you've got to figure out, do I want to putt over this thing? Do I want to fly it over it? Do I want to bounce it into it? You know, and if you just miss a fairly small area, the ball's going to shed and go in every different direction. And I thought that those sorts of features around greens were very, very interesting and created a lot of different possibilities instead of just one particular possibility or one different shot. So those were the things, you know, I was just fortunate to be out on the Monterey Peninsula in October and went over to Cyprus again and just looked at the mounding on the front of the greens and 6 in particular, that green complex and the slopes and the feeds from that. And so I think that tied in a lot to what Mark Parson and I were trying to do over in Scotland, is make the game around the greens much more interesting, perplexing, complex in a way from the requirements of the shot as opposed to complex from the composition of the architectural features, meaning, you know, putting bunkers everywhere or over-shaping things, but just using simple, subtle rolls and mounds with tight grass on them created a ton of different...
Tight grass on them.
I think that's really the way to go. So obviously they need to be maintained. I mean, you can't build something that's conical that, you know, you can't get a mower over, or you can't maintain at that level. But I think that it's not anything new. It's just, I think, something that maybe has not been done a lot in recent years. And so I think that was a characteristic that we really felt could add some interest to courses. He was the only guy who was so obstinate about, we put a bunker in the middle of the 18th fairway, which is a par 5, and it's just a little pot, not much bigger than this table here. And you know, we basically had to go, it was right in the middle, so you either go left or right of it, over it, put them in that more uncomfortable range where they're sort of 95, 85 yards. It was right at 100, which Brad Faxon, who was our consultant, taught us, or kind of said that was the perfect yardage. Or you had to lay up short of it. And Tim Herron, we were sitting at lunch, and he said, I hate that bunker. And I said, why? He goes, it's right where I want to hit it. And I said, well... and I said, well, that's why we put it there. And he goes, well, that's stupid. And I said, well, you know, you can still get to that yardage. I said, but you can go left of it or right of it. No, I want to be in the middle. And he just wouldn't, no matter what I said, finally you just sort of brush past it and let it go. But what I learned is they play a different game than you can even imagine. I mean, I know there's some really good amateur golfers in here who can play close to that, but the way they hit it and the way they think and the accuracy and the precision that they bring to it was mind-boggling. And I did find that one of the things that bothers them more than anything is are not perfect stances. So we tried to, as most of you, all of you know probably, it was a Palmer design, and they put a lot of catch basins in the fairways and flattened everything out and had all these nice 1% slopes going to the catch basins, 2%. And so we tried to fill a lot of those in and create cross slopes and side slopes, and the players didn't really like that all that much. They just, you know, they like to have the ball just sitting there perfectly for them. So that was one of the things that kind of came out.
Hey, Gil, here's another one, which is you may not want to answer this too much, but Jim, I talk to your partner, associate Jim Wagner all the time.
He'll say a lot of things that I won't say.
Well, okay, maybe he should have been here. The last thing he said to me was, we were talking about other things, but he said, can you tell me what you think really pisses off tour players? And I'm like, I don't think I probably can. And he said, because that's what I'd really like to do. And I said, are you kidding me? And he went, no, I'm serious. And I've known Pete all my life, died. This is what he joked about, and I think he was probably serious. So I guess the question is, it's probably a nice idea theoretically, but how far do you think you're really going to push something like that with these courses like that one?
Well, it is difficult because you don't, I mean, there's a part of you that doesn't want to be criticized in the paper or hear the best players in the world saying this guy has no idea what he's doing, but there's the other part of you that really thinks that physically they're so advanced and how they play, that there's very little you can do, length, yardage, depth of bunkers, to really intimidate them. It's more a function, I think it's more of a mental thing, is really try and get inside their head. And I know Jim and I have talked a lot about that. I mean, there's, on the 6th tee shot at TPC Boston, there's a branch that sticks out from a white pine that lines the side of the hole that's, it's about that big around. And they hated it. It just got in their mind that I might hit that little branch, because the trajectory was just sort of perfect for their tee shot. So I think it was little things like that, that if a guy who's as good a player as any of those guys on tour is standing there on that tee, instead of thinking about what type of shot he needs to hit, is thinking about that little branch, that to me is kind of an interesting aspect of it.
Well,
But one of the things working with Brad, Brad was very helpful and very interested in trying to figure out what made these guys uncomfortable. I mean, he really, you might think the opposite. He'd be thinking of what makes them comfortable, but he was really trying to figure that out.
I think the good news is you go ahead and try and make them uncomfortable, and the next thing you know, a year or two later, is they really like it. They go for it. And I think Kapalua, for instance, was a good example of that. Half of the tour there, or thinking pros, like that sort of misdirection type stuff where the ball, so if you push the envelope, they get out of their little comfort zone and say, hey, this is pretty
well,
cool.
we just had an interesting, we're taking the 15th tee at that course at TPC and dropping it about 6 feet so the players can't really see. The only landing area they can see is close to the fairway bunkers on the left, because they were always just taking them out of play and hitting it to the right. Now they can't see the right side. So it's more of it's a less comfortable tee shot. And Steve Wensloff, the tour architect, was on the range with VJ Singh down at Sawgrass last week, and he asked him what he thought about that, and VJ kind of said, which is interesting because VJ hardly said anything during the whole process. He said, yeah, I kind of like that idea. And Steve said, well, you won't be able to see as much. He said, that's okay. So maybe there's something happening there.
Do you think that Brad Faxon's opinions on this is anything due to the fact that he kind of plays an old school game?
I do.
And also that he's into course design?
Yes. Yeah, I absolutely do. I think he's, there are a couple guys out there that I think, obviously Ben is at the head of the class with respects to that, but we've been fortunate to spend some time with Davis Love, and he gets it. Brad certainly gets it. I mean, Jeff Ogilvy gets it. There are a handful of guys. Joe Ogilvy gets it, maybe something with the name. But there are guys who really, I think, understand architecture and appreciate, or at least architecture as almost everyone in this room views it, as opposed to some other architects out there.